Simon, please start the recording.
Okay, it's running.
Okay. Before we dive into the Foresight methodology, let me give you a brief overview why we are here. Luke is the 4-year Horizon Europe project running until 2028. And our core mission is simple, but also vital. We want to strengthen Ukraine's research and innovation system, and we want to integrate it into the European research area. And to achieve this, the project stands on 2 main pillars. The first pillar focuses on a multilateral joint call. We closed the submission phase for proposals middle of May this year, and the response was incredible. 288 proposals were handed in, and the topics were focused on energy, social sciences and humanities, health, and cybersecurity. And over the next month, we are in the middle of the evaluation procedure, and by the end of this year, the proposals will be informed if they are granted or not. But our work goes beyond funding individual projects. The second pillar, and that is the reason for our workshop here, is about long-term strategy. And one of our central deliverables is contributing to a possible strategic research and innovation agenda for Ukraine. In short, we call it SRIA. And you can think of the SRIA as a strategic roadmap. It's kind of a policy document that sets the priorities for the entire national research system over the next decade. And it defines where to invest, what to rebuild, and how to attract and retain top talent. Of course, a document like this cannot be written from a desk in Brussels or in Bonn, and it requires the expertise of people who know the Ukrainian system from the inside out. I'm just looking at the chat that it says that, yes, we will share the recordings. So the SRIA covers its unique strength from the Ukrainian system, its current gaps, and the changes already happening on the ground. And the insights we gather throughout this project, and specifically during our upcoming Foresight exercises, we will have a few, they will feed directly into the policy recommendations that shape a possible agenda. And to give you a better picture of our timeline, so by the end of this year, we will deliver an interim report, it's called, on a possible drafted SRIA structure. And that will already capture the immediate priorities and scenarios we developed together. And then over the following 2 years, we will refine, stress test, and update these findings based on the evolving situations. And then we will submit a final report and give policy recommendations at the end of 2028. But before we go further, I want to say one thing directly to you. Of course, we follow the news very closely every single day, and we are painfully aware of the attacks that have been happening daily in the last few weeks and for a very, very long time now. And we just wanted to say that we are standing here with you. We are there, and we are we keep informed. And yeah, for many of you thinking carefully about 2035, while you are living through these horrible circumstances in 2026, that requires a particular kind of effort, because the uncertainty, we often speak about that in Foresight, is actually real for you. The losses are real. The distance to a stable horizon that can feel very large. And strategic foresight does not pretend otherwise. But what it offers is a structured way to hold that uncertainty and at the same time to think beyond the immediate, to ask what we want to build and how we want it. So, and that is exactly what this group will do. And I believe it takes both professional expertise and also personal interest to think beyond. So the foresight approach has two steps. Today we do it, or how we do it is step one. First of all, we build a shared language and prepare the material for Krakow. And then in step two, at the on-site workshop at the Solaris Center in Krakow, around 25 of you will apply selected foresight methods in person. And in Krakow, we will produce trends, images of the future, and draft strategic priorities. Today's agenda has 4 parts. This introduction. Then Simon will give you an overview of strategic foresight, an introduction to trends and drivers. And in the end, we will explain to you your preparation task, followed by time for questions. And of course, please use the chat at any point. My colleague, he is monitoring the chat and he will bring your questions. He will raise them to me. And of course, for this webinar, no prior knowledge on foresight is needed. Simon, now your turn. You'll explain what strategic foresight is.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henriette. We will start with a simple yet very powerful question. So when you hear the word future or futures in plural, what comes to your mind? Any association that you have with the word future? If you want to, you can type in the chat your associations that you have with the word future. And there are obviously no right and wrong answers. Henriette and I don't know what the future will bring. So yeah, it's not about forecasting or predicting, but about your associations. When you hear future, what do you think? Let's have a look at the chat and curious to hear your thoughts. Interesting. They're coming up. So we have some aspects like uncertainty, for example, some bigger concepts, opportunities, also a positive outlook here. We've seen peace and solidarity. We've also seen, let's say, some policy areas or technologies, for example, but also something which I particularly like is a dream versus something that I can build. So the two, we have economic answers, so to say, future priorities, R&D. So yeah, very different answers that we found here. So let's take a step back and realize what kind of possible range of answers that you have produced. So we have seen the differences that you came up with, and it's especially important to hold on to that range. And I think it reflects something very important. One lesson learned maybe as early as now, that the future is not only one thing, and there is not one future. It's many things at once, and that is precisely the basis for strategic foresight. So we say that the future can refer to tomorrow. It can refer to 100 years from now. I didn't specify. So strategic foresight, usually we look at 10, 15 to 20 years ahead, sometimes maybe even further. So that distance for us really matters. It gives us enough space on the one hand to free ourselves from the pressures of the present, and especially for the Ukrainian RNI system, that matters particularly. We think that the daily pressures, as Henriette said, they are substantial. The war, infrastructure damage, funding gaps, researchers emigrating across Europe, etc. And Foresight asks us to hold all of that and at the same time to look further towards then here in our case, the year 2035. So here I want to introduce a woman called Margaret Mead. Some of us might have some skepticism about where a small group of people like us can generally change anything of significance. So the anthropologist Margaret Mead has a clear response to that. She said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So history offers many examples of this, for better and for worse, obviously. One pattern from research on non-violent civil movements shows that it's known as the 3.5% rule. So when roughly 3.5% of a population actively joins a movement, that movement tends to achieve its objectives. So a small share with an outsized effect. And I would like to introduce a second very impressive woman to you. Her name is Elise Balding. And her story is very relevant to what we're doing here. So has anyone of you heard or seen an image of that woman? If yes, please type in the chat. So Elise Balding was a Norwegian-born sociologist. So after the Second World War, she attended a conference on the peace movement. And at a panel discussion, she asked her fellow panelists, who were some disarmament experts, a question that almost sounds a bit too simple, I think. So what would a world without weapons actually look like? And how would it function? Not one of the experts had an answer to her question. So Balding realized something very important here, I think, that the peace movement was working for peace, yet without a clear picture of what peace actually could look like. So she put it directly. They did not know what they were working for. A world without weapons and without war, yes, but what kind of society, what kind of institutions, etc. So Balding herself began running workshops. Participants were invited to travel 30 years into the future in their minds and describe in very concrete detail a world without weapons. Then, so that was 30 years ahead, the work grew backwards along a timeline to the present, describing how the world had come about. So finally, each person decided what they would personally do from that day onward to contribute. And in 1990, Elise Balding was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So why does this story matter to us today? Because we think that Ukraine's research community stands at a similar point. So a great deal of effort is going into rebuilding the system, but a clear shared picture of what that system could look like in 2035 is still forming. So what does a functioning, well-connected Ukrainian research system look like? What institutions does it need? So what additional institutions maybe? How does it relate to the European research area? So these are the questions that we will work through in Krakow. And then, like Balding's participants, we will play our way back into the present. Balding's question itself did not change the world, but it widened the thinking of everyone in the room and gave them something concrete to work towards. So the real agent of change have often been those willing to ask difficult questions and imagine something that's not yet visible. So Muhammad Yunus, who you might, some of you know, who pioneered microcrediting, asked, what if everyone had access to a loan, even if they were poor? Jean Monnet, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, asked, what if countries that had been at war formed a community? So in our context, we might ask, what if the Ukrainian diaspora became the world's, so the country's greatest research asset? What if Ukraine entered the EU not as a catching up economy, but as a leader in a specific technology field, for example? So now I would like to ask and invite you. Please write one what if question on your own in the chat. It can relate to the Ukrainian research and innovation future, but also doesn't necessarily have to. So I would like to take a minute or two in order to see your questions that you would come up with. Again, there are no wrong questions. You can type in any what if questions that you can come up with. You can also be bold in your thinking, right? I mean, the question, what would a world without weapons look like? It's quite bold.
I really like the um, what if we had answers to all the questions. I really like that one.
Yeah, we also have what if nature had a voice in all these discussions? What if AI became everyone's personal teacher? But also, what if all military budgets were redirected to education, healthcare, and science? And what if our ideas about the world are wrong and we need to change with them and at the speed of the world's change? So yeah, you see very different questions, and that's exactly the spirit that Henrietta and I are looking for, especially at the workshop, then also in Krakow. So please keep the spirit, and we are now going back to our webinar, where we will talk about why we talk about multiple futures. This is one of the central ideas of foresight. So we speak of futures in the plural. We can have as many futures as there are people on Earth. So what we think will happen is also probably not what will happen, actually. The future is not a straight line that we are drawing from the past. So when we fix on a single most likely scenario, we might become blind to actually some alternatives. And the alternatives are actually the things that will arrive. So Brexit, COVID-19 pandemic, etc. Each of these examples existed as a possibility before it happened, but very few systems actually were prepared for any of them. So we see here like one of the figures that I really like in order to illustrate that, yeah, there is uncertainty, but there are also very different branches and fates that await our life. So that's something that, yeah, you should keep in the back of your mind. When you signed up for this webinar, maybe you had an impression of strategic foresight, etc. So there is a common misconception between the forecasting, so which go more into the prediction area, versus strategic foresight. So the common question, how is foresight different from forecasting, is that forecasting takes the past data, usually numbers, and projects them forward. So typically 3 to 18 months. So if we have a GDP growth forecast, that's a standard example, and the underlying assumption is that past performance reliably predicts future performance. Foresight, however, does something very different. So it explores a wide range of signals and trends over, let's say, 10 to 20 years, and it constructs several scenarios and asks what is possible, probable, and sometimes even preferable. The short version, so forecasting in a lot of cases produces numbers, whereas foresight prepares an organization or a government, for example, for several futures at once. This is very tricky because we have different time horizons, etc., and it's the world is uncertain. So we live in a world which is defined by VUCA, we call it. And not only we call it, but it's a standard classical concept. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if there's any context in which is more management concept, in which this is more than a management concept, it's the Ukrainian research system today. So how do you plan an innovation agenda when the security situation changes on a daily basis? So how do you attract and retain researchers when the pull of European institutions is strong and conditions at home remain unstable? So strategic foresight was developed precisely to help organizations navigate this kind of environment. Again, not to predict what will happen, but to prepare for several things that might actually occur. So we can use strategic foresight for the parts in green. We can use and answer volatility with a vision. Uncertainty is real, but we can try to understand possible futures better. Complexity can then be answered by a bit more clarity, at least in the several scenarios that we're looking at. And ambiguity can then, if done well, lead to more agile organizations or ministries. Henriette will now move to the very important topic of overcoming biases.
Yeah, there's one more element we need to address before we look at the methods, and that is the role of our own minds. Each of us brings biases into every conversation about the future, and you can imagine biases as mental shortcuts that can cloud our judgment and shape how we see the world. We listed a few on the slide, and so the first one is the confirmation bias. That means we search for information that already matches what we believe. Then we'll have the hindsight bias. After an event, for instance, we reconstruct it as having been predictable. So after 2008, books explaining how obvious the financial crisis had been multiplied rapidly. Or after February 2022, many analysts stated they had been warning about the Russian invasion for years. Another bias is the precision bias. That means we assign more credibility to exact figures. So a prediction of 3.2% growth feels more credible than when we say around 3%. And even though if the precision is not, it may be false. Then we have the optimism bias. That means we tend toward optimism about our own personal futures. We have the pessimism bias. That means we think pessimistic about the future of states and institutions. And we have the short termism. That means that the urgent displaces the important. Everything complex and long term is quietly pushed aside. For biases, there is no simple cure. You only need to be aware, and that is the first step. And the second important step, how to deal with biases, is using structured methods that force us beyond our own filters. You see a comic here. I'll let you take a look at it. If you never step aside to think about the future and analyze the world around you, you might miss new megatrends helping you ease your day. So let me give you a brief overview of how a foresight process is structured.
Henriette, there was a question in the chat that I found quite interesting. The question was, and how can we combat these biases and prejudices? So, as Henriette said, the first step is about making it aware and being aware that we as human beings have biases. As we'll also state later, the beauty and the added value of strategic foresight is that it never happens just with 2 or 3 people in a room, for example. So we invite people with different backgrounds, for example. As we've done in Krakow, you all have very different backgrounds, come from very different parts of the Ukrainian RNI system. So that's how we try to minimize at least the biases. We as human beings will always have biases, and we won't neglect that they will become part of the final product of the foresight process. But we try to equal them out with including more voices with different perspectives and to make them aware. These would be the 3 steps as a very short answer to a complex question that we admit. I hope that not answered your question, but at least gave you some ideas of mitigation effects, not more.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and if you're aware that biases exist, you can be much more careful about them and think again when you state something. So the next slide shows you 5 stages of a foresight process. That's how we usually do a foresight cycle. And we start with signals of change. That means we scan the horizon to recognize emerging early stage changes before they become mainstream. Think of smartphones, for instance. When you gave a lecture to students, maybe in the beginning you saw one student with a smartphone, but then later, and that would have been one signal of change, and later everyone had a smartphone, so it kind of became a trend. And trends and drivers, they are the next step. We analyze and connect these signals to understand the broader forces actively shaping our future landscape. And then is a third step, we'll develop scenarios. We construct diverse images of the future to explore alternative possibilities and expand our strategic horizon. And then the next step would be a forward-looking strategy we'll develop. We translate these future insights into a resilient strategy and map them out to the concrete path of success. And then the fifth step would be monitoring, evaluation, and cultural change. We ensure constant adjustment and capacity building to keep our strategy alive and embed a long-term foresight mindset. In Krakow, we will move through stages 1 to 4 together, and the trends you will bring, they are the entry point to stage 2. Now, we'll have a quick question before we move on, and we are launching a short poll. In the chat, Simon, he will give you the link to a small poll. And then we would like you to know, how familiar are you with strategic foresight methods? 1 means you have no experience at all, and 10 means you are an expert and would be comfortable leading a session yourself. So Simon, he will give you the poll in a second, but you can already think about 1 means no experience and 10 means you are kind of an expert.
Okay, I realized that the Slido poll is not yet active, so we would kindly invite you to
Okay.
draft or to write the numbers in the chat. So again, 1 from 1 to 10. 1 if you're a very beginner, you have actually no idea what you signed up for here. And number 10 is that easy, I could give the webinar myself. So if you could just write the number in the chat, then we get a bit of a picture. We see a 10. Okay, Henriette, that's good news. The rest of the webinar is on Zahar. We actually see a lot of people with a confident
indeed.
level of strategic foresight. That's very good to see. I think that's very promising also for Krakow. We also see newbies with that are new to the method, which is great also to spread the word. Okay. Interesting, a very mixed picture, I think. We have some people that are new to the topic. We have some that have heard about it before, but also a couple of experts in the room. I think that's exactly the kind of mix that we were looking for.
Yeah, that is great. So thank you. You'll show the next slide. I'll summarize 3 main takeaways until now. So first of all, you'll have to remember there are many possible futures. We think in the plural. Second of all, we carry a responsibility for the long term, and in this case, for the next generation of Ukrainian researchers. And thirdly, we actively influence which futures arrives, and futures do not happen to us. We can shape them. Next, I'll want to explain and dive deeper into what trends and drivers are, because we will mostly work with them in Krakow. So imagine Foresight as an ocean. And the drivers, they are like the currents. They are deep, powerful forces that push and pull society, and they determine the direction of the flow. Examples are climate change, geopolitical tensions, EU accession, or other big dynamics. And trends are like the waves, so observable patterns on the surface. These are the movements and little waves we can track and measure. And examples are the demographic decline or AI integration in research or investment into defense. Understanding these forces of an ocean, that's the key to navigate the future. Why do trends form the foundation of the whole foresight process? Because they are the raw material for everything that follows, for the future's wheels, for potential futures, for scenario writing, for visioning, or for input for strategic recommendations. So they are really the start. And here is something worth noting. Most organizations and even most nations are not able to stop a major trend. So, for instance, think of urbanization or demographic change. The task is not to end or stop the trend. The task is to understand it clearly and respond with intention. Now, the next slide, please. So, how can you get a grip on all these trends when you collect them? When we do foresight work, sometimes we collect 50 trends, 30 trends, or even 100 trends, and we have to kind of categorize them to get a grip on them and to really see a picture. So, and we will also do that in Krakow. We will use a framework called STEEP V, and it stands for 6 lenses through which we can examine this change. So the first one is social, technological, economical, environmental, political, and values. And I will give you now examples for each of the category. And when I give you the example, I also invite you to start thinking about your own field. So for instance, we'll start with the social lens. A significant share of Ukrainian researchers have left the country since 22, and a substantial diaspora research community has formed across Europe. But at the same time, demographic pressure and internal displacement are reshaping the talent base of the system. So the central question is not simply where researchers are located, but how to build working models that function across borders and over time. Then the technological lens. So the example is the war compressed innovation cycles from years to months. Drones or secure communications and battlefield medical technology moved from laboratory to field at a pace that no peacetime procurement process would allow. Or another example for the technology category, artificial intelligence is changing the practice of research itself. And in digital public services, Ukraine's DIIA platform or DIA platform that represents a genuine international benchmark of a technological category. The economic lens, reconstruction needs are estimated in the hundreds of billions of euros, and international donor funding shapes today's research agendas, sometimes in ways that reflect donor priorities more than national needs. Or another example is defense technology is attracting growing private investment. And the central question for 2035 is how Ukraine builds a sustainable and self-directed innovation economy rather than remaining dependent on external funding cycles. The environmental category. The example is the war has caused severe ecological damage, contaminated soil, destroyed water infrastructure, and millions of hectares requiring demining are each research challenges as much as they are also humanitarian crises. Another example is green reconstruction standards also tie the rebuilding process directly to European environmental frameworks, which creates both obligations and opportunities. The political lens, the example we picked is EU accession is the dominant structural driver, alignment with the European Research Area, association to Horizon Europe, and the full range of science diplomacy defines the policy space for research. Or another trend would be security requirements now shape international research cooperation in ways that were not needed a few years ago. And finally, the value category. The example we picked is research integrity or open science, academic freedom, and public trust in science are not weak concerns. They are the foundation of a credible research system. And there's an obvious question. So, how open should a research system be in conditions of active conflict? So, these examples, they are only a starting point for you and they don't draw a complete picture. They do not replace your knowledge of your own fields, and your expertise is needed here. So what we did was we picked a few trends and we categorized them into this steep V framework. A practical question is, how do you find a trend? So we begin with a broad search, mostly on the internet, and we write the future of X, where X is your field. And then we use time filters to get recent material. And then also you can vary your search terms. So when you when you write the impact of artificial intelligence on the future of material science, of course, you get very different results when you only search for artificial intelligence or only search for material science. And also, when you look for trends, look across many fields and not only your own. Be aware on social, political, economic, environmental, scientific, and technological fields. And then also include artistic sources because art often carries early signals of change that have not yet appeared in policy documents or academic literature. And beyond the internet and search engines, what you can also do is that you apply for domain-specific newsletters, that you scan recent papers on Google Scholar, that you'll read the European Commission's annual report on strategic foresight, that you'll apply for publications from national and international foresight institutes, or read venture capital newsletters because they show where investment is moving, and that is often before trends become widely visible. And one discipline we should integrate in our practice is read sources that challenge your thinking. And please watch out. A trend that confirms everything you already believe deserves additional scrutiny. And now it's your turn again. We would like you to type one trend you observe in your own field into the chat. One sentence is enough. And again, here's no right or wrong. You are the expert of your own field. We will not check if it's correct or not. We just want you to start thinking on how you could find trends. And you'll have around 2 minutes.
it's interesting to see also again the range of trends while you are thinking, or in case you've already included your trend, you're also reading through the chat probably, and there are examples of the impact of social emotional learning on teaching democratic values, for example, that Jaroslav contributed, or many trends on different uses and how artificial intelligence is reshaping our world. But also about a world and including automation of medical documentation, for example, image analysis, the way we teach, the way we learn, etc. One observation, which is non-judgmental, is that 70% of the trends that we are seeing here relate to artificial intelligence. And that's for a reason. It's reshaping, it's a revolution, etc. It's reshaping basically all the other aspects, all the other categories as well. But that's exactly why we need Steep V for. So in order to not be blind to the other trends that are happening at the same time, to environmental trends, for example, to values we've covered in parts, but to political trends, to social trends, to economic trends, for example, that's why we apply Steep V. So in most of the examples, most of the scenarios are very tech-driven, also because technology is rapidly propelling our economies, etc. But the idea is also to have a very big picture, like a bigger picture, and to paint a detailed world of 2035, for example, in all the different categories. So that's also why we, at some point, we take a step back and just see that the technology category is full of trends, for example, as we see in the chat now. And so we try to direct the thinking also a bit, at least to say that what impact or what trends do you see in the environmental category, for example, and not AI plus environment, but also general environmental trends, because since a lot of things and aspects are interconnected, for example, they will probably also shape the Ukrainian RNI system. So that's exactly the reason why we're working in practice in our projects, also a lot with STP categories. So again, thank you very much for your very, very good trends. Actually, nearly all of them applied the different quality elements, for example, that we said. So which direction does it take? Is it growing? Is it diffusing, etc.? A lot of them were specific, and so looking forward to the rest of the webinar, and especially to continue the discussions then in Krakow based on the different trends.
Yeah, I think you can already move to the slide where we'll explain the homework. So if you do one more slide. Because what we want you to do is that you'll bring 3 trends relevant to Ukrainians' RNI system in 2035 and beyond. And for each trend, please prepare 4 elements. So we'll need a title, we'll need a short description, just name the Steep V category, and also give the evidence, one concrete piece. Either you'll have the trend because of a study, a statistic, a news item, or an observation from your own professional experience. And after the workshop, we will provide you with a 1-page template. And it'll be great if you could send me your trends by the end of this week on Friday. You'll find my email address here, and I'll also write it in the chat just shortly. Thank you, Simon. And what is also important, that when you look for the trends, that you'll keep 3 criteria on mind. So they need to be specific, evidence-based, and forward-looking. It should not be a trend relevant for 27, but please look beyond. Please look at 2035 in around 10 years' times. And then if you'll do the next slide, we'll show you an example. So the trend we looked at is, or we picked, is accelerating scientific immigration and the rise of the transnational workforce. And the description would be Ukraine's research talent is rapidly moving from localized physical institutions to, and that means it's highly dispersed, globally embedded diaspora. The category of this trend is social and economic, and the evidence base is 18.5% of active Ukrainian scientists fled abroad within the first year of full-scale conflict. And critically, these represents the nation's most highly cited and active researchers. And the source we found this information in is from the Nature Human Behavior, published in December 23. And in Krakow, we will then see what the implications of a trend would be. So, for instance, this trend, the physical brain drain must be converted into digital brain circulation, would be one implication. Or the research and innovation system must pivot away from rigid centralized infrastructures towards agile distributed virtual networks. So in Krakow, your trends are the entry point for day one. We will do a steep V mapping exercise across all 6 lenses. From there, the groups select the most critical trends and explore their consequences using the futures wheel method. And that we'll do on day one. And the outputs of that work feed directly into the 3 horizons exercise. We will start on day 2, in which we map the path from today's RNI system to the system we want to see in 2035. And after that, we'll begin translating that path into priorities for possible strategic agenda. And your 3 trends are they are not only a warm-up exercise, but they are the foundation of the entire 2 days. So we'll be glad if you'll try to do this homework. And while you are searching for trends in your expertise anyways, we thought it would be great if you could write one sentence describing your own working life in 2035 as a researcher in Ukraine. And now over to Simon.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have a next session coming up on the logistics, but we suggest to keep that within the circle of people that will actually attend the workshop in Krakow. So I want to summarize a bit what we have discussed today. Afterwards, of course, you will have questions to ask, and that we hopefully try to answer. And I would like to close the session also with a thought about Elise Boulding. Remember, that was the peace activist, What If There Were No Weapons? So she ran those workshops without really knowing whether they would matter. The disarmament experts she had challenged, they in the past didn't have any answers. So the peace she was working towards was anything but certain. And yet she kept organizing. She kept asking people to describe the world they wanted, and she kept asking what each of them would do to help build it. So the Nobel Committee eventually thought that that was worth recognizing. And I mean, bold words, but in a very small, again, we zoom in, and we are here today also for a similar reason. The research system you want in Ukraine is in the year 2035 is not yet fully visible, but you and your peers have the knowledge of it and you have experience within it. And now we also hopefully at least introduced you to some tools for thinking about the future. So the trends that Henriette kindly asked you to do as a homework are a first step. So we are looking forward to discussing these trends then with you, and then on the basis, think about how a effective and efficient Ukrainian RNI system in the year 2035 and beyond could look like. So again, we're very happy that you could join us and are open to any questions that you might have. You can either raise your hand, which you can do in the WebEx setup, so to say, or you can write in the chat your question as you prefer. They can be from different categories. So the idea is also with Steve V to think in different directions. So feel free to choose one trend on which is more social, one technological, etc. Feel free. Anything that comes to your mind or that you researched. Yes, Alexander.
May I ask? I raise the hand electronically. My question, because I'm in a Look program, how many projects are expected to be funded? That's probably a question to Henriette.
We don't know yet, and we are still in the evaluation procedure. It's not known at all yet because yeah, we just have the submission now. We'll do the national eligibility check at the moment, and then throughout the next weeks we will find out about the proposals that are not eligible for funding. And after that, we have a clearer picture on the ones that are still open for evaluation. And then the evaluation process is it lasts the whole summer. And by the end of this year, hopefully we'll have the funding decision. And then the projects start next year. And if you yourself hand it in a proposal, you can also contact NRFU about or ANASU about the status.
One more question. Is one more round of Look program expected, or it's only one?
Only one. Only one. For this project, we only have one funding round. Yeah. Alexander, you also raised your hand.
I already asked a question.
Sorry for that.
I'm just already taken it out, but it doesn't take.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear the name Simon said in the beginning. Thank you. Anyone else? To the content of the Foresight webinar now, and also if you have any further questions on the logistics, feel free to ask for the workshop next week.
Okay, seeing no more questions in terms of the webinar content, I think. Yeah, we would like to say a big thank you that you decided to spend the last hour with us. We really appreciate. We hope that we could give you a very brief introduction. In the end, it's just a 1 hour appetizer, so to say. We invite you to reflect now when you log off, to sit back and to think how you can actually, or what kind of methods you can apply in your day-to-day life, in your professional life, maybe. There are many toolboxes, for example, or playbooks available on the methods of strategic foresight. There's a whole bunch of literature, entire study programs, etc. So if you're curious, then this might be a good way to look at that. And it's, even if it might feel distant and a whole new methodology toolkit, maybe one takeaway is that all of us are already experts in trends. You read the newspaper, you do listen to podcasts, radio, etc. And it's only about being aware of that this is a trend, that this might be a signal of change, that this is something that you haven't heard before and which might become a trend, for example. So that's at least that we're trying to shape also the awareness and recognition of what might be future developments, and also to think in the future as plural, so that there is not a single future that everyone is working towards, but multiple futures that we can actually, in very minor parts, but actually influence also. And these are some takeaways that we would like to give you from this webinar. Appreciate your time, appreciate your interest, and especially active contribution. And yeah, I would suggest the people that will attend and join us in Krakow to stay in the room. And I would stop the recording here and appreciate all of your time. Thank you.